the questions among you. And so, George, I think you said,
Yeah, I guess.
It's your turn first.
okay. So, let's try to,
We do have the comfy chairs for you guys if you'd like to be front center.
Okay. Well,
If not.
let's try to limit the responses to a couple of minutes. I do not have a stopwatch, so we get a feeling that it's too long. Will somebody with a cane pull you away? So, first question, why are you running for mayor? And what are your priorities in the next 2 years?
Actually, put that in.
what's that?
It's gonna be easier to just go sit here and.
All right.
talk about it.
Either way.
Thanks. I'm running for mayor for a number of reasons. First, I want to congratulate George on his 10 years as mayor. George put a lot of time and effort into the community, and I really appreciate that. A lot of good things have happened over the last 10 years. But from my perspective, I think we need to move in a little different direction on a lot of critical issues. The first one is South Highway 97. When I was mayor way back, we did get the commitment to do the reroute through and take that traffic out of downtown. As you know, the reroute ends at the couplet. We also got the Highland Glacier couplet done, we committed to when I was mayor. I think we need to work on that, and we haven't done that for the last 15 years. Specifically, we need to identify a corridor on the east side of the tracks for the future extension of Highway 97. The current 97 will not work long-term. I think you're seeing a glimpse of the future right now when it turns into a parking lot. That will get alleviated somewhat when Canal Boulevard is done, but you're seeing the future with more and more traffic on current Southway 97. Not only is it frustrating to be in, and to be in that parking lot kind of situation, the businesses along that corridor are going to suffer tremendously. People are just not going to want to access that area. And those businesses, it's going to become more and more a blighted area instead of an asset to the community. I talked to Gary Farnsworth and the chief planner at ODOT. I think the concept of getting a corridor on the east side of the tracks is doable. I do believe it will accelerate the future construction of the south half of the reroute. And that's one of the big differences that George and I have. Another one is on the old Juniper Golf Course. We had to move that golf course 10 years or 15 years ago now because of the patent that the FAA has on that land. It cannot be leased except for fair market value, which the golf course obviously cannot afford. Now we have an opportunity to develop that 200 acres, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take some work with the FAA to get part of it released so that we can sell that part and get the capital to improve all 200 acres into a business park. Nothing's been done on that for the last 10, 12 years. The other one is the Central Oregon Community College. I've met with the college, George. I think we have an opportunity under this current administration to get the FAA patent released on the city land around the college so that in the future, when it can expand or needs to, that land will be available to it. Without that release, the college cannot expand. Another issue is on our housing, new housing development. I do think that we need to work harder on requiring more quality or more neighborhood creation in those tract subdivisions so that they have the quality that we want to have people want to live here in. We need a diverse housing market that will support not only all the charitable needs for this community, but also downtown. If we have only workforce housing going on, it's not going to be healthy for the community long term. So some of the issues that I believe are important. I believe that we need a little change in direction on those, and that's why I'm running.
same question.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you for inviting us. Good afternoon, George Endicott, Mayor. I'm going to take a little bit different approach. As you heard Ed say, I've been mayor now for 10 years. You've seen a lot of changes in the community in that time. When I became mayor, we were in the throes of a pretty deep recession. In fact, they say the deepest recession we've had since the Great Depression back in the late 1920s and early 30s. And During that whole time, though, Redmond's been able to thrive. If you look at what we've accomplished during that period, we rebuilt downtown, we rebuilt 5th Street, we rebuilt 6th Street, we put in Centennial Park, we ended up having some other parks. Quite proud of what we've done with Hope Playground, and you know, when it was finished, it was the largest fully accessible park in the state of Oregon, and it may or may not be today. I think they built a bigger one in Clackamas, but in any case. So when you look at all of the things that we've accomplished, what does that tell you about the way that I want to approach things and the themes that I want to pursue? And as far as I'm concerned, it's about people. It's about the people in our community. It's about keeping us in the area that we want to live, work, and play. My focus has been constantly on living wage jobs, industrial and manufacturing capacity. We've doubled the number of industrial jobs in the last 10 years. If you look at the population of Redmond, it's doubled since the year 2000. And so we've still kept it as a small field, small town feel in Redmond. A lot of you in the room, I know, I've known you for years. You know, some of you I grew up with, right, Mike? So some of us were born and raised together in this room. And I want to keep Redmond the town it's always been. And one of my concerns about the approach that Ed's taking is that all of his issues are about things and transportation. And my focus, I want to continue to focus on people and living wage jobs, and some of those things we do affect our quality of life. I'm on the steering committee for the South 97 reconstruction project that we're looking at now, and next month we're going to get some final proposals on ways to try and alleviate some of the pressure on that road. We have some other intermediate plans for making Himholtz a western arterial, putting in an eastern arterial, trying to do some interim steps till we can get to that long-term project that you heard Ed refer to as reroute phase 2. And we do have that on our plans right now. We do have a notional laydown of that road in our town. And in fact, I was on that committee shortly after we finished the reroute. We got together and already started discussing that road. But the thing I want to make clear to everybody, when you look at government projects, they take a long time. The 945 acres we just got that were in the annexation agreement with the state, that took 10 years. I've been talking to COCC about doing some land swaps to get them more property. That's been underway for 5 years. So a lot of these projects that we want to do take a long time, and that's okay. And one thing I will tell you just very briefly, I can't say too much about it right now, but we do have right now underway a final agreement that we're working on to build a major hotel on our patent lands here in Redmond. And if you look around the nation, what you'll find all over, all the airports. I mean, Ed's talking about these patent lands, but in the last 17 years, that whole notion working with FAA has changed. Up at PDX, the whole IKEA complex is on patent land. You go to O'Hare, you go to LAX, you go to PDX, you go to airports all around the nation, and what you find is large developments on patent lands. So it can be done. The thing with it we have to do is attract the people that want to come here to do those kinds of projects. So having said that, I have been your mayor for 10 years. I look forward to another 2 years. Thank you very much.
Ed is next on the next question. So I asked in the first question, priorities in the next 2 years, what critical issues do you think will take longer than that concern you?
Government's always not as fast as business, but in terms of my priorities, South Highway 97 would be the top priority going in, getting that corridor identified. When George says there is a corridor on a map, that's true. That corridor makes absolutely no sense at all. I've met with Mike Cacavano, our engineer. That corridor that George is talking about starts like up near Hemlock and doesn't even use most of the existing reroute. It just doesn't make any sense at all. There are very few buildings right now ending up south of town. That makes the most sense, that's the most logical, and that's what we pursue. All these kind of projects take work not only within the city, but they take partners. You've got to work with your state legislators, your county, your federal delegation. I've done that before on a number of projects. I got that done when the original COCC campus, we had to have that patent released so CC could actually locate there. I did that when I was city attorney, working with the county, working with the state, and working with the federal government. When Lansdale wanted to come here, they would not come unless we got a release of the patent so they could own the land next to the airport. I got that done with the FAA and with Greg Walden's office. It's all doable. We're not Portland, we're not Chicago, we're not Los Angeles. We're not going to have an IKEA shopping center here within our lifetimes. And you guys are much younger than me. We got to do what's best for the community now and in the foreseeable future. And that is developing the old Juniper Golf Course through a combination of sale of a portion of it to generate the capital to improve that business park. So instead of seeing a desert out there, you have an oasis for business development for those family wage jobs that we need for the future of our children and our grandchildren. We have to work hard on all these issues. None of them are going to happen overnight. And they're not just things. These are things that happen that actually help people. You're the ones who have to sit in that traffic. We're the ones as a community that need those jobs and need those businesses to locate near the airport. It's about people, not things. Things are there to help people, and that's what this is all about.
George? Longer priorities.
Longer term priorities. Well, you've heard me mention a couple of them already. I do think that long term we're going to need something for a reroute of some kind. What I'm most concerned about is the impact that has on the businesses that are here today. I had a chat with one of the business owners along South 97, and his comment was, boy, if you move the traffic off of this road, I'm dead, and you better not do it. So, take your pick. One of my long-term priorities is making sure that we secure some ways to be able for companies to come here and develop that 945 acres just right here to our immediate south. We have some transportation needs. I actually have a company interested in coming here. They want 100 acres. The problem is they need access to that land. And one of my long-term goals is to see the quarry interchange in 19th Street come right up. It's the road that you come in when you come out here to the golf club and see that whole area develop. We would get hundreds or thousands of jobs in here, and that's an industrial park, a huge one. And that would create living wage jobs for our community. Another long-term project that alleviates transportation pressures, as I pointed out earlier, is the Hemholtz arterial that would go around the west side of town. I think if you look at our maps and the long-term plans for Redmond, a lot of the development for homes and residences is over on the west side of town. And so we need a corridor over there to be able to help people move quickly and efficiently around the west side of town. On this side of town, on the east side, we have our industrial area. And we need to try and figure out ways to put another corridor in over here. Remember that there are really two different groups of people that use our major highways here. There are those that are traveling through, right? And then there are those that are local traffic. The latest traffic studies we just completed this summer show that on Highway 97 right now, about 70% of the trips are through trips, and about 30% of the trips are local trips. So how do we manage and balance those so that we have groups of vehicles coming through here, those that want to stay in as well as those that want to come through? So again, my priorities in the medium term, I'll call it, is getting the quarry interchange built, getting Hemholtz widened and turned into an arterial on the west side of town, and then looking long-term at putting in some sort of a reroute on this side. We continue to grow. We're going to be needing some more things like public health. We're going to need more wells, some more reservoirs, down the road, probably expansion of the sewer treatment plant. So we also have the public health, public safety issues too that we have to deal with, not just looking at infrastructure. So thank you.
In their responses, it seems as if they've anticipated some of my questions. So my prepared questions, I will take a shorter tact with. And so I would hope that after I'm through with my questions, that there will be time for some questions from the audience. So George, what do you envision to use for the old gymnasium next to City Hall, and how will it be paid for?
Okay. There is a group in Redmond that are passionate about trying to figure out a solution for the old gymnasium. I think some of the people in this room actually use that gymnasium, Alan, probably. And have a strong affinity for what we do at that building. It's going to cost about $6 million to fix that building. We had an engineering study done right after we finished City Hall, the old school. One of the strong proponents for that building is to make it a performing arts center. The problem we have with that is parking, and how do we solve a parking problem so that we could do something like that. The other thing I just said, it's a $6 million bill, so we are not going to fix that building with our current budget. So we would have to get grants and so forth to try and figure out a way to fix that building. The other issue we have with the building is the way it's built. Because of the way the bricks on the outside are not attached to the frame, if you can imagine. So that's really an almost rebuild of the exterior. So if you want to keep that building looking the way it looks today, it would be a very, very intense project. And of course, the last piece of that is a barrel vault roof is also not trivial to try and repair and replace the parts of that. So a lot of people in this town really like that building. It's a great facility. We're trying to figure out a way, if we can save it, and if we can save it, what would be the best use of that facility. And I'm sorry I don't have a direct answer, but we do have people looking at it all the time.
Ed, your view on the gymnasium?
There's always a big distinction between sentiment and emotion and what's really the smart thing to do. I played a lot of basketball in that gym. My kids played a lot of basketball in that gym. It's a great facility, or it was in its heyday. But bottom line is, there would be no logical path to spend $6 million to rehab that building. It doesn't make any sense. I agree we need a performing arts center, but you don't do it there. You do it in a more logical place, at a better price tag, that has better parking, better access. But I do think that building in the long run has to go. I hate to see it go emotionally, but intellectually, I just think that would be the smart thing to do.
Next, I have individual questions. For George, Heather Richards, a former member of Redmond Kiwanis, served as Community Development Director for many years and accomplished many things, including the renovation of Sam Johnson Park in partnership with Kiwanis. It's our understanding that her position remains unfilled. Why, and how do you plan to replace her?
The direct answer is that Heather Richards did not work for the city council. She was not our employee. She was the employee of the city manager. And it's really his responsibility to decide how he's going to do that. Now, having said that, our city manager recently completed a reorganization where we now have a deputy city manager, and that individual part of his responsibilities is community development. So by law, we're required to have a community development director, and we currently do have one. I will, though, in closing, say a quick word about Heather. And Heather was brilliant. She was an innovator of the first order. And when I go to League of Oregon Cities meeting, the mayor of McMinnville picks on me and tells me that he's very happy that he has her on his staff.
Ed, do you believe that the city of Redmond took the correct position in not allowing marijuana to be sold within the city? And why or why not?
Well, since I've already said on Facebook and in my thing that no, I disagree with that decision. I think the city has passed up approximately $68,000 a year in revenues from the state with that decision. I don't believe in promoting marijuana, but I believe that choice for adults is important, same with alcohol. If we had marijuana, what I would recommend is that we only have 2 establishments, one on the north end, one on the south end, similar to what we have with OLCC for liquor. I would also ensure that that would not be anywhere close to neighborhoods, schools, daycare facilities, etc. But I don't think you're stopping people in Redmond from using marijuana. I get emails all the time, why do I have to drive to Bend? I do think that if we did that, if we crafted that carefully, I would put it out to a vote for the people to decide. I wouldn't just make that decision with the council alone. I think that public input would be invaluable. I think that public decision would be the right one. But I do believe the public and the community should have an opportunity to make a decision on that issue, to see what the effects are, to see what the ramifications are of not allowing it versus allowing it. Even Culver, even the city of Culver is looking at it. The Sisters is looking at it. I don't think we should pass up, when we're desperate for revenues to support our police department, I don't think it's a wise choice to pass that up.
Funding public services can be a jigsaw puzzle. In Bend, the city tax base seems inadequate, while the park district there appears to be rolling in dough. Is the city of Redmond tax base adequate? If not, how would you address that situation? George?
Actually, it turns out that our property tax rate is below the level that we are legally entitled to have. We're one of 2 or 3 cities in the state that actually has that, I'll call it advantage. When the fire department left the city and went to the district, we reduced our property tax rate by $1.75 a thousand, so that the fire department could then impose a tax of $1.75. So in other words, there would be a wash for taxpayers to move the fire department out of the city. The other part that we did at that time, we did a charter change, which says that any increase in property tax would take a vote of the people. Prior to that, the council couldn't have done it. And we just felt that it was a good idea, so that we would go to the taxpayers, those that would bear the burden, including myself, of course, that if we wanted to do a property tax increase in Redmond, that we would ask the people of Redmond if that was what they wanted from us. Is it adequate? You know, I'm an economist, so we have insatiable needs with limited means. I mean, you know, that's a human condition, right? We'd all be riding here in limos, I guess, if we had unlimited means. So, you know, we could always use more, I guess. Our roads, for example, we have what's called a pavement condition index, and we're at 82, which is really, really a good number. You know, we'd like it to be 100, right? You know, we don't have the money to do that. We'd like to improve all of our parks simultaneously. We don't have the money to do that. You heard a reference, you heard Ed reference our police, and we're a little bit stressed in that area. We'd like to hire more policemen. So we could always use more money, but I think that right now Redmond is really doing a good job. And if you go back for all the time I've been involved, and I know I've talked to Alan Unger about this, and even prior to me, we've always had a very frugal, even group of financial managers in Redmond, and that has served us in good stead. You heard me mention I took over during the worst of a recession, and yet here we are today, and Redmond is a thriving community. And all of that happens with very good fiscal stewardship.
Ed, what is your view on the tax base in Redmond?
I agree with George that Redmond's been very, I'll call it modest and conservative in their financial pro formas over decades. starting maybe with Bob McWilliams way back in 1980. We've had really good fiscal management in our city. I agree with George that there's always, more you can do with more money. There's no question about it. I also agree that any levy on the people has to be through a vote of the people. I strongly disagreed with the tax on the utility or water bill. That was not well thought out. That would have been a regressive tax where someone who is on Social Security or having no income would pay the same as someone who's making $150,000 a year. That just doesn't work well. From my perspective, if the city has needs, it has to come up with a plan that's broad-based, not just focused on one department, but to serve all the needs of the community and justify it in a very fiscally conservative way so that voters can understand, we do need this, we want this, we are willing to pay for it. If you don't meet those three criteria, you are never going to get the trust of the whole community to support what you're doing. So it takes planning, it takes public input, it takes a sound conservative plan. If you're going to go for more money, you've got to have those three components. And there may be a need for that in the future, but it has to be done that way, carefully, with a lot of input, and really the most conservative way you can do it. That's how you get the voters and the community to trust you to spend the money wisely and for the purposes that they find to be most valuable.
So we've covered my questions. Now I'd like to the audience, since we have a number of non-Quadians here, I'd like the first question to go to somebody who represents that population.
I was just curious to hear about the medical district. Initially, at one point, we had talked about there had been something on the table about building around St. Charles, some structural changes just within that area in terms of making it more like a campus, maybe changing access to the highway. But I was just kind of curious what currently is happening in that, where you see that going. I know that it's worked well in Bend to have, when St. Charles was put out east, it allowed for a lot of other medical needs to be built in that area. So I'm just wondering, I'm wondering how you see that, how you see serving the needs of healthcare for people in Redmond.
Sure. Take that one.
I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of infilling around the hospital. If you drive around the hospital, you notice there's a lot of vacant lots really close by. There is a growing medical services component around the hospital. You see more and more specialists providing services here in Redmond. So a lot of that's going to be private driven in terms of what they're going to be investing into that area. I do believe the city can, there is a, and George can talk to this more than I can probably, a medical district concept, which would improve the infrastructure around that area. I'm not sure I agree with having like another urban renewal district where you keep the taxes in there, but it impairs the taxes for the entire community. I know I used to represent St. Charles for a long time with Ron Bryant. I know they have expansion plans there. Part of it would be a realignment of Kingwood. In the long term, there will be a strong medical presence there. But again, most of that will be private driven by private investment.
George?
Sure, I think what you were referring to was the master planning that we did probably 5-8 years ago for that whole district. And it was a medical/business district concept that we put into place. There were two pieces of that. The private owners that you heard, the vacant lots, and others that own the property in there all came together. And in fact, Alan, you were one of the players in there. And we put together what I thought was really a very, very nice master plan on how to develop that whole area. And I'm going to be frank here for a minute. It required a significant investment by St. Charles, and early on they agreed to that investment. They've had a change. I don't know if it was ownership or leadership at St. Charles, and they backed out of the deal that we needed for that initial capital investment to make that whole project work. So what you see now is more incremental work going on, but we still do have plans, for example, to move the access to 97 over to Kingwood off of Large. But what you're going to see now is probably incremental development rather than the master planning that we had done earlier. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's, I would still like to see long-term that master plan come into play.
Ann?
Yes, Ed, this idea of building the bypass, I've been party to a number of studies of that. It's expensive, and it seems to me that the reroute, in spite of having an urban renewal district, has hurt the businesses on 6th. And if you take the traffic away, as George said, from the bypass to some further thing, how are you gonna deal with the business owners and prevent them from losing their shirts?
There's no question that moving the traffic out of downtown Redmond has some adverse effect. But having 40,000 vehicles and all those trucks go through 5th and 6th Street would have even been much worse. I remember back before the reroute, you could walk down 6th Street and not even hear the person walking next to you because of all the truck traffic. That downtown would have died if we did not get that traffic out of there. The same thing will happen with South Highway 97. It will die if you do not get that through traffic, the bulk of it, out of there in the long run. The question is that the businesses along there, are they there for the reroute, for the through traffic, or are they there for this community? If you have businesses there for this community, that's going to be the worst case scenario for them if they have 50,000 vehicles a day on that route. People in this community will not even want to go there. It will become a truly blighted area. And make no mistake about it, there will be a median down that road. And those businesses are going to be somewhat hurt by that, but if we do it the right way, where you can U-turn every now and then, it will help. But that area has significant problems, no question about it. The east side especially, because of the location of the existing 97 and the tracks. West side has better opportunities for access off Canal Boulevard with more side roads or back roads. That has more possibilities. But if you don't do this reroute in a long time, that whole area will just become a blighted area no matter what. Now, from my perspective, the #1 project on the 97 corridor, of course, is Cooley. If any of you have driven down there at 8 o'clock in the morning, you can well imagine why it's the #1 project. You can wait 4 traffic lights to get through there. Right now, the state has allocated $50 million for that project, and I think, talking with ODOT, they will get the rest of the money from the feds sometime in the next year or two. Once that project is done, what do you think the #1 project in the 97 corridor is going to be? It has to be the South Highway 97. Now, if we get the corridor identified and preserved, I believe that in 5 to 15 years, somewhere in that time frame, if this is the #1 project, to work with the Federal Highway Commission, to work with ODOT, we will get the funds to build that reroute. And in the meantime, we will have already spent money on improving existing 97 so that it works for local businesses and works for this local community. That's what I believe we need to do, and I believe that's what we can get done.
Other questions? Dottie?
Okay, I'm kind of confused. All this land around the airport you're wanting to build, what happens if the airport was to expand? Is there land there?
Yeah, the airport has a very long-term master plan. In fact, it has a plan to build another runway northeast to southwest on the south end of the airport. There are no plans, and I would not, and it shouldn't be, to put the runway closer to downtown. The lands we're talking about are to the north of the airport and basically to the west of the airport, on the west side of Airport Way. What happened is, after World War II, the federal government decommissioned this Army air base and gave the city all the land that had comprised it. That land was not only the land that you see inside the fence at the airport, but a lot of land outside, such as the old Juniper Golf Course and where the college is and a number of other parcels. Yeah, they kept a deed restriction on those lands, saying that you couldn't sell them without that property, without their concurrence. And if you leased it, you have to lease it for fair market value. Now, back in the 80s, they started to enforce that fair market value requirement on leasing it, and that's why the old Juniper Golf Course had to move, because in 2006, the lease was going to run out, and it would have had to pay $300,000 or $400,000 a year just to stay where it was. I believe that a golf course, which is in the middle of our whole business sector and is close to the airport, has a great opportunity to be redeveloped, but it needs capital to do that. The city doesn't have any money, the airport doesn't have any money, so where does that money come from? It comes from private industry. And the way you do that is you sell a portion of it, maybe 40 acres of the 200, to raise the money to put all the infrastructure in to make it into a business park, so it's an oasis for business development instead of a desert. That's how I would look at it.
George?
I'd actually like to address both of those questions, but I'll start with this one. If you look at the airport today and its configuration, as Ed mentioned, we do have a 20-year master plan. In fact, it's right now at FAA for approval, the latest version of that plan. And we do have plans in there, what we call both inside the fence and outside the fence. Okay, there might be an opportunity to expand inside the fence in the future. That's where you might have aircraft manufacturers, things like that, that are specifically aircraft or airport related kinds of activities. You can do some other kinds of things outside the fence. And that's one of the areas that you're hearing about it. If you heard me a few minutes ago, we now have the first major project that's planning on coming to Redmond to build on leased land long term. And that's this hotel complex I mentioned. So we do finally have broken through, and we are going to start seeing development on our patent lands. Whether you sell it or don't sell it, I have been told by FAA that that is just not a realistic assumption. When Ed did all those deals that he's talked about, those were 17 years ago. The world has changed, the FAA has changed. And I just don't think that, in spite of his best intentions, I just don't think it's going to happen that way. In terms of what we're going to do on the reroute long term and the repair and fix of South 97 short term, when you look at the intent when we first did the reroute, the goal was to get traffic out of downtown. That is, in particular, truck traffic and the freight. We have accomplished that. The goal of repairing from there south or doing a new project south has a different intent. It is not to get trucks off of the highway necessarily. And when you talk to some of those businesses, you actually heard Mr. Fitch say if, and I believe a lot. If this, if that, that's true. If the whole goal is to not have any traffic at all except local traffic on 97, then what happens to those businesses that rely on through traffic for their business? A lot of those restaurants along there, a lot of the other businesses that exist in that corridor want that through traffic because that's what they rely on for their business and their long-term viability. So just to trivialize and say we're going to build a reroute and get all the local traffic back on 97 and it'll be great, and then we'll get the through traffic onto the new reroute and we won't be bothered anymore. I just don't see that as realistic. One final statement about downtown. What we found when we built the reroute, traffic downtown dropped to about a third of what it had been. It's now back up to about 50% of what it was. However, it's all local traffic now downtown, or with very few exceptions. You might get a lost truck driver. But other than that, the people that are downtown now want to be downtown. And downtown is improving. We do have some new businesses coming in, and I think it's quite healthy now compared to some of the adverse impacts from some time ago.
Dan?
Speaking of downtown, there's a long time history of vacant storefronts downtown on 6. Numerous small businesses say they approach the owners of those buildings and the owners are reluctant to lease the buildings that they just don't even want to talk about leasing the buildings, or their rent that they suggest is way beyond the other market values in downtown. What can we do about eliminating or getting some of those vacant storefronts back into the market so that small business could use it?
We'll get John Hodecker to buy them all and lease them and make them carry half what the other owners are asking.
Ron Bryant.
Oh, okay, Ron Bryant. Maybe they'll team up. We have a lot of absent landlords. And in fact, I know one of the buildings that you're probably referring to is owned by someone in California. And if they live in Palo Alto, they're looking at leases and rents a heck of a lot different than downtown Redmond, Oregon. But there is some good news coming. I don't know if you've heard, but a buyer, a developer recently bought 3 of those buildings downtown, one of which is the old bank building. And it is going to be refurbished and rebuilt. One of the restaurants, I can't remember the name of the one that was next to Diego's, is being redone now. That will be opening up, and then there's a third one, I'm not sure which one it is. The eyesore to me is the one halfway down on 6th Street near the Arch on which side? The east side of the road. And that one is one of those I'm referring to where we'd like to get the landowner to be a little more flexible, I would say. But, and again, remember, small businesses, unfortunately, like it or not, you know, when they initially start, I mean, there's about a 90% turnover or failure rate with small businesses, which is really too bad. But, and we see the effect of some of that as well.
Yeah, you have a response?
Just briefly, I agree that it's frustrating to see those vacant storefronts. The downtown did suffer kind of a double whammy. First, around 2006, when the reroute was done, you know, that traffic went, and then 2 years later we have a recession. So it's taken a while to get out of it. I remember when I first came here in '79, with the recession that we had back in 1980-81, even Ben's downtown had similar vacant storefronts. So it does take time. One thing I would recommend on downtown is to look at the residential areas right by downtown and to ensure that we get sidewalks throughout those areas, encourage redevelopment of those properties, bring more families close to downtown, more people who want to access downtown for either restaurants or professional offices. Those are things that we can do to enhance the viability, the vibrancy of downtown, as well as working on storefronts, etc. But I do think that doing like a local improvement district for sidewalks makes a lot of sense. It's not coming out of the general taxpayers. It's going to increase values of those properties around downtown. Those are things we should look at as well.
John.
I hate to beat Highway 97 to death, but both of you have big plans for it. My question is how do we pay for it? And are we going to sacrifice any current community services to do so, particularly to lock up the routes that we need to get the route up and
I thought it was going to be a Kiwanis project.
To benefit the children?
we need Heather back for that one.
No, every tough project has tough questions. How do we do this? There will have to be a contribution from the community to having a reroute. Now, George and I have a fundamental disagreement as to whether we need a southern extension of the reroute or not. I firmly believe we do. I believe that it's going to take a combination of local resources, county resources, state resources, and federal resources to get that job done. But if we, I guarantee you, if we don't do it, that whole our community will suffer tremendously, because what will happen is on the east side of the tracks, right now all that is zoned for business development, industrial development. We have about 3 or 4 buildings in that corridor now. But if we do nothing, that area will develop and it will become financially impossible to have a southern extension of the reroute or parkway, however you want to call it, just like in Bend. If that happened and you have, 50,000 vehicles on the current South Highway 97, that will become basically a parking lot. What's going to happen? I believe that what is going to happen is ODOT will eventually say, we're just going to go around the whole community because we can go through the BLM and get that land for zero. And we'll just build it right around Redmond, rather than have 50,000 vehicles on the current South Highway 97 where you can't move. If that happens, this community will suffer tremendously. And I think we can avoid it if we plan carefully, if we work carefully with our state and local and regional and federal delegations. We can get the money identified long-term, but we have to preserve that corridor now.
Can your marijuana sales help with that at all?
That's for police.
I actually had a meeting with ODOT, Gary Farnsworth, and some of his crew to discuss a reroute, phase 2. And what would that look like, and how would we do it? The numbers I got were 200 to 300 million in today's dollars. Yeah, you're right, John. That money, I mean, unless Ed has a money tree in his backyard, I understand that we go and ask our partners for money. And the problem I have with, it's not that I don't want, of course I want it. What I want, though, is something that's realistic and we can actually reasonably expect to happen at some point in the future. What ODOT tells me, and the way they prioritize, they have what they call a STIP, which is their transportation plan for the state that they do every couple of years. And they prioritize projects based on region and based on community and based on what you've gotten in the past. When they looked at that, and they were realistic about it, they said, look, Redmond got a huge infusion of cash 10 years ago, 12 years ago for the reroute. They said Bend, so that's a local infusion. For a regional infusion, you just heard Ed reference, Bend just got $50 million of state money to help pay for theirs. They're next in line, if you will. Where Redmond fits on that list, and then Bend will go to the bottom of the queue. We are nowhere near the top of the queue for any dollars in the near future, because there are cities and communities and regions all over the state that are ahead of us. Metro, of course, being one that is an exception because they always get money. They got a lion's share of House Bill 2017, and they probably always will because that's where the population is. So I don't want you to misunderstand. I want that reroute too. The problem is, how do we pay for it? And you are right, John, that is the issue.
Let me get one more thing. In 1999, the current reroute that we have is not on the STIP. These are political decisions. They're not cast in stone. We got on the STIP because of political efforts. Through our state delegation, through our federal delegation, we were able to get from the bottom of the heap to the top to get that money. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it that this will be easy to do the reroute. But if we don't do it, if we don't take on these hard tasks, our community is going to suffer. And that's what I haven't seen in the last 10 to 15 years. We have not taken on those difficult issues to get to a result. You know, we have to do it now because you will lose that window for any kind of reroute if you don't start taking steps now.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to call an abrupt halt to this because Kiwanis still has a little bit of business to conduct. If you're not a member of Kiwanis, you're welcome to stay for that. If you feel you need to leave, that's okay too. But thanks again to George and Ed for your time today.